I got the chance to try out an S6 Jiyan in one of my recent streams, and I was absolutely blown away by how good old units can be with sequences.
Wait, what the? Bro, your Jiyan is doing so much damage. What the f is going on?
And the fact that you can get sequences with corals during the character's rerun means that there is a much easier and guaranteed way to make your old units much stronger without having to spend money on Lunite purchases to pull for them again, which can make you lose the 50-50. So I decided to make this video to point out the best early sequence of 5-star units in the game to help you out if you're planning on getting sequences for your favorite characters in Wuthering waves, but it's a bit difficult to decide, especially for free-to-play and low spenders. The main goal of this video is to make you enjoy your favorite units for the longest possible time, since they will be eventually power crept by new content in the game, which usually influence you to pull for new limited units. But you won't have to if the units you already have on your account are much stronger in terms of damage and buffing capabilities.
That's quite big.
As a disclaimer, I don't have a habit of getting sequences for every character on my account, but to make sure I can provide the best value of information for you guys, I did consult some of my Discord members who usually pull for sequences of most characters on their account, like Helium for example, who made the all sequences simplified document that I shared through a community post some weeks ago. If you haven't seen that document yet, link will be in the description. Also keep in mind that most of the footage used in this video was captured on the media server to give you a good demonstration of the damage output that you should be expecting if you decide to go for the sequence that I'll recommend. So some things may or may not be different for some units on the official server. With all that said, let's start with Jiyan. The best early sequence that I recommend is S3, which increases crit rate by 16% and crit damage by 32%. The activation conditions basically ensures that there is no downtime on the crit rate and crit damage buffs when he's on the field. But S3 can be a bit too deep for low spenders and free to play in my opinion. However, it can't be helped because S1 and S2 are honestly not that great. S1 can solve his ER issues, so you don't have to double intro to him during your rotations, saving you time in the process because one of the intro skills can be given to the sub DPS like Mortefi for faster and smooth rotations. But the second part of S1 is honestly quite useless because all you need is an intro skill which gives him half forte to use the special liberation tied to his forte circuit. And in his liberation state or the Qinglong mode, you can spam the two skills with no cost of forte stacks involved. So reducing the stacks consumption when he uses a skill does not make much sense to me if the purpose was to spam it more often because the skill itself does not scale off heavy attack damage. S2 faces the same issue. Why give Jiyan more forte stacks after an intro skill when he only needs half of his forte stacks to use the liberation from his forte circuit? And again, the skill doesn't scale off heavy attack damage to make use of heavy attack damage amplification ultra buffs. The 28% attack buff is quite nice, but it does not come close to the crit buffs from S3, which also reduces his dependency on Shorekeeper. Yinlin. S2 will be recommended because it provides more forte stacks, which makes her much easier to play with. The fastest rotation for Yinlin at S0 is intro, skill, heavy attack, and skill again to get full forte stacks. But it can be difficult sometimes because the heavy attacks range is quite limited compared to her basic attacks, so it can be a bit hard to hit fast moving targets. S2 makes it much easier because you can intro, basic attack, skill, basic attack 1, 2, which has a longer range, and then use the skill again. It also reduces your dependency on intro skills, but you still need to use heavy attacks for that to happen. All you need to do is skill, heavy attack twice, and then use the skill again. Keep in mind that S4 is the best sequence since it's a team-wide 20% attack buff, but the focus of this video is on early sequences, so S2 is recommended to make her much easier to play with if you're a very casual player. Jinhsi. S1 is highly recommended because you gain 80% damage increase whenever you use the Luminous Epiphany skill or the Dragon Nuke in simple terms. The buff type is not very specific, but keep in mind that it's a resonant skill damage bonus, not a damage amplification. S2 is made for overworld exploration when you're not actively engaged in combat more often, which makes it easy to get full forte stacks without coordinated attacks, so it's not worth the price in my opinion since it's useless in endgame content. You can always use other units who are better at exploration in terms of faster and easy methods of doing damage, including but not limited to Iuno, Phrolova, and Augusta. Changli. Her sequences in general are not really considered as huge damage boost, but S2 is highly recommended for an early sequence because it allows you to run crit damage as the focus echo, which is even better if you have her signature weapon with a crit damage substat. So reaching that crispy 300 crit damage should be very easy at S2. Zani. S1 is recommended as an early sequence because the 10% crit rate ensures that there is no downtime on the attack buff that the on-field character can get from the Empyrean Anthem set. But do keep in mind that the 10% crit rate is not high enough for you to run a crit damage focus if you're running her signature weapon, which has a crit damage substat. The 15 resonance energy also ensures that you can always get her liberation backup every rotation if you were not able to get at least 120 ER on her build. But if your build is well optimized for crit and ER, she'll be fine at a 0 if you're mainly interested in her buffing capabilities from her outro skill. Keep in mind that S2 can potentially increase her damage output since she'll do more coordinated attacks, but in Carlotta and Jinhsi teams, the rotations can be so fast that you will have to use her liberation again in the subsequent rotations right after the 25 seconds cooldown, so you won't even be able to do all the 27 coordinated attacks, which defeats the purpose of S2. S3 is DPS Zani territory and S4 is way too deep, so make S1 your priority as I mentioned earlier. Xiangli Yao. S2 is highly recommended because you gain the 30% crit damage very easily when using the Forte skill outside his liberation state and when the liberation is activated. S1 is very terrible by itself because of the low damage scaling of the new convolution matrices, or the small cubes in simple terms, as you can see right here after dealing damage with the Law of Rings skill. Keep in mind that the damage from S1 will be increased with S3 and S6, but stick with S2 as an early sequence that'll make him much more stronger to clear endgame content every reset. Camellya. S2 is highly recommended to increase the Forte skill significantly because a bonus damage multiplier of 120% is absolutely insane. But if it's difficult to grab S2, you can't really go wrong with S1, not only because of the 28% crit damage, but the anti-interruption from the Forte skill as well, since she can easily be interrupted when using it. But this only applies if you're a more casual player, because you can properly time the Forte skill so that you don't get interrupted more often. So S2 is highly recommended, but S1 makes her gameplay much more comfortable. Carlotta. S2 is highly recommended to boost her damage output because of the additional 120% multiplier of Fatal Finale, which is the last nuke that she uses in the Liberation state or the Twilight Tango state. Stopping at S1 doesn't provide that much value because the additional Forte stacks that she can get after using her second skill or the Chromatic Splendor is not really needed since she has no issues with Forte stacks regeneration even at S0 in a trio team composition. Also keep in mind that the 12.5% crit rate is not high enough for you to run a crit damage focus when running her signature weapon, which has a crit damage substat, but it does reduce her dependency on Shorekeeper for the crit rate buff that she can provide. So if you decide to get sequences, target S2 and you should be good. Roccia. She's often overshadowed by Sanwa, but with sequences, she can be the best Havoc damage buffer in the game. Go for S2 since it can provide a whopping 40% Havoc damage bonus to the entire team when she uses her plunge attacks 3 times. Adding that to the 20% Havoc damage amplification that she can provide from her outro skill, the 15% Havoc damage bonus from Midnight Veil, and she becomes the best universal Havoc damage buffer in the game right now, so you can always put her in any team where the damage dealers belong to the Havoc attribute. Pheobe. S2 is highly recommended not because of the additional 120% Spectrofrazzle amplification for Zani, but her outro skill can nuke as well in the Absolution state because of the 120% outro skill damage amplification. S1 would have been very good if she could stack Spectrofrazzle to the max in the absolution state when she uses her liberation, which will get rid of the need to pair her with other units like Spectral Rover for example, but sadly, it's limited to the confession state, which doesn't provide that much benefit for Zani, because while you can fill Zani stacks much faster, with S1 Phoebe, you'll still need to use Phoebe's forte heavy attacks anyway for the concerto energy to outro to Zani, so that Zani can get the 100% Spectrofrazzle amplification. Keep in mind that if you mainly use Phoebe as a Zani support and buffer, S0 will do just fine, but if you're interested in her damage capabilities, go for S2. Brant. S1 is highly recommended not because of the all-type damage bonus increase to 60%, but most importantly, he can get interrupted when using his forte skill at S0, which can make him lose a lot of damage. The stagnation effect, or the enemy slowdown when using his forte skill, will make his gameplay much easier and help you maintain your sanity when you're up against highly aggressive enemies. S2 modifies his build where you can run a crit damage focus instead of a crit rate focus echo, and allows him to do damage from off field with a pretty high damage scaling, but S1 is a good stopping point since it increases the damage output, especially when playing him as a hyper carry, and provides a big quality of life change for his damage output. Cantarella. Even at S0, her damage output is quite decent when playing her as a hyper carry, but you can take it even further with S2, which can make her trigger Jolt 3 times instead of 2, since the Liberation can now apply Hazy Dream, and the Jolt multiplier gets an additional 245% increase. But if you're more interested in quality of life change and a little boost in her personal damage, S1 can be your stopping point because of the anti-interruption that she gets when using her forte skill. So she's much similar to Brant in that regard, because their forte skills can be interrupted pretty easily due to the long animation that they have to go through before the damage is registered on the enemy. Zani. S2 is highly recommended mainly because of the 20% crit rate, which reduces her dependency on Shorekeeper. It also buffs the damage from the special skills or enhanced skills when not in her liberation state. But do keep in mind that these skills of Spectrofrazzle damage, so you get more value from the second part of S2 when running her with Phoebe because of the Spectrofrazzle damage amplification that she provides from her outro skill. You can stop at S1, but do keep in mind that while it gives you 50% spectral damage bonus, the second part is a double-edged sword. Even at S0, Zani has the highest inbuilt anti-interruption in the game, so you can die pretty easily while doing damage if you don't have a good healer in your team, because she can tank the damage without flinching. S1 basically puts that on steroids because Nightfall, which is the last slam attack that does the highest damage, will never get interrupted. Ciaconna. She's pretty underrated when it comes to her buffing capabilities. At S0, she can provide 39% error damage bonus to the entire team, making her one of the best buffers for mono error team compositions. My recommendation will be S2 because it can grant an additional 40% error damage bonus to the entire team as well. So the total error damage bonus will be 79%, which is absolutely huge. If you have her signature weapon, it even shreds error resistance by 10% for all teammates as well at rank 1. Cartethyia. S3 is what I recommend, but it can be a bit too high of an investment to make, especially if you're a low spender in the game. It essentially gets rid of Ciaconna because Fleur-de-Lis can apply 2 arrow erosion stacks much easier with most attacks that she does on the field. So at that point, you can basically play her solo, as you can see in the footage right now. So S3 is basically bye-bye Ciaconna and bye-bye Arrow Rover, but it doesn't stop there. The Liberation finisher that splits up the heavens also gets an increased multiplier of 100%, which is pretty huge. However, if S3 is a bit too expensive or a bit too deep for you, target S2. It essentially gets rid of Arrow Rover because you can now basically get Rover's outro skill by transforming into Fleur-de-Lis. The next instance of damage from Fleur-de-Lis will apply 3 stacks of arrow erosion. So if you already had 3 stacks on the enemy, you can now get 6 stacks, which you can properly manage by transforming back to Cartethyia to apply them when running Sanwa instead of Ciaconna. Keep in mind that the second part of S2 increases Cartethia's multipliers by 50%, not Fleur-de-Lis. Lupa. S2 is the best sequence in terms of providing more buffs to her teammates. It grants 40% fusion damage bonus to all teammates for 30 seconds. If we add that to the fusion damage bonus from Flaming Clawprint, her weapon at R1, and her passives, she can grant up to 99% fusion damage bonus when fighting bosses in endgame content, which is even much higher than the attribute damage bonus that Roccia and Ciaconna can provide from their S2, combined with the best in slot echo sets that also provides attribute damage bonuses. Going any further than S2 will be more of a personal preference. Phrolova. S2 is a bit overkill in my opinion, but I recommend it because S1 has some issues. Let's break down what S2 actually does first. The base damage multiplier of the enhanced attack is now increased by 75%, and the damage multiplier per aftersound, which is the 82.55% right here, is also increased by 75%, which is absolutely insane. The best part about S2 is that you can now easily obtain 32 aftersound stacks in the first rotation, which was limited to 18 at S0 with Cantarella and Roccia. The 32 stacks will grant 68% crit damage for Phrolova in the first rotation alone, but will gradually increase with more echo skill cast from your teammates in the subsequent rotations. Now, the issue I have with S1 is that while the 2 extra stacks of Cadenza or Forte stacks can make our rotations much easier and faster, it only applies in overworld exploration where you're not actively engaged in combat, so the second part is pretty useless in endgame content. Keep in mind that if the active character in your team is engaged in combat, all your teammates are also engaged in combat. Augusta. S2 is highly recommended because you get 40% crit rate due to the 2 stacks of Crown of Wills from S1, and any crit rate above 100% will give you crit damage times 2. So let me use this build here as an example. If I activate S2, I now get 118% on 280% crit damage. Keep in mind that we get an extra 30% crit damage from S1. Now, if I proc the 20% crit damage from her echo set, I get 118% crit rate on 300% crit damage. Getting any sequence further from S2 will be per your own personal preference. Iuno. She's by far the only character on the list that does not really need sequences if you mostly depend on the 40% damage amplification from her Forte circuit for Augusta or the 50% heavy attack damage amplification from her Ultra skill. But for those who are more interested in increasing her damage output, I strongly recommend S2 because she can easily get up to 80% damage amplification after an intro skill and using her liberation if we consider the 40% damage amplification that she can already get from her Forte circuit. Keep in mind that Augusta can also benefit as well since she can easily stack up 1 light to 10 stacks in the full moon domain created by Iuno. If you want her to do high damage but can't afford S2, S1 should be fine, but keep in mind that the 40% attack buff and the resonance energy that she can get is the main focus here, but the third part of S1 is almost useless. The skill that is available when she's doing damage lets her basically teleport to a different area when you add a directional input, so you barely get interrupted when using it. You can also swap out of the heavy attack absolute fullness that creates the full moon domain, and it won't interrupt the animation, so no anti-interruption is needed unless she's S6, where her absolute fullness turns into a nuke that gives her full stacks and resets her skills to start doing damage all over again. Shorekeeper. She's perfectly fine at S0 if you usually pull for new units, get their weapons, and mostly get their best in slot sub DPS buffers or hybrids as well. But if you usually run non-best in slot teams with alternative signature weapons as a free-to-play or low spender, S2 Shorekeeper can be perfect for your account to help you make up for the damage loss with the 40% attack that it provides to all teammates. But do keep in mind that it's absolutely useless on characters that skills off anything other than attack. Cartethyia is a great example. I did not cover sequences for standard units because Kuro will make sure that you get them anyway by losing the 50-50. This took me quite a while to put together, so show some love by leaving a like and subscribe as a way to support the channel. Be sure to also join our Discord community if you're having any issues with the game or you just want a place to chill or hang out. Link will be in the pinned comment below. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.